The team made some bold decisions about who to retain and who not to commit to. The Jaguar fans will have some bold statements as they watch like a hawk to see if those decisions turned out to be the right ones. We'll discuss it today here on Locked On Jaguars on a Monday.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Tony Wiggins. I have covered the Jaguars for over a decade plus, whether it be on podcasts, radio, or whatever. And I'm here to give it to you again today. And by the way, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, which BetOnline has you covered this season with more props and odds than ever before. That's right. BetOnline is where the game starts. And where you start every day is here with me on Locked On Jaguars, making us your first listen. And we greatly appreciate that. And to let you know, we are free on all platforms and on YouTube. Make sure you find us on all those platforms and like and subscribe to the podcast. The Jags made some bold decisions in free agency, which started about this time last week. The team really went after some players. And, actually 2 weeks ago, they went after some, was it 2 weeks ago or last week? I think it might have been last week. It just feels like it's been forever, right? But the Jaguars made some bold decisions of guys that they went out and got and guys that they kept and people that they did not keep. Fans always take score, right? So I'm here to start that a little bit and let you know the ramifications of what happens if they were wrong and what happens with if they were right. I'm going to start with the two spots, and I'm going to do them in segments 1 and 2. The two spots that have been discussed ad nauseum by Jaguars fans, back and forth with me on Twitter at Shop Talking Wig, by the way, or just period. One over the last few years have been the offensive line, and the other is the wide receiver core for the Jaguars. Those are the two main areas that seem like that garnered the most attention in the free agency period. And it hasn't stopped. It's still that way right now. So first and foremost, the offensive line. I know you guys want me to go receiver first because every time I talk about the offensive line, I get a bunch of people telling me, well, you need to dress wide receiver. Don't worry about doing that. So the most important positions that were added to the team appears to be pass catching. And I'll include Evan Ingram, the tight end, with that. But I told folks the whole time that you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. You can address offensive line. And by addressing offensive line, what I mean is maybe add a player or make a commitment to people, but it's still going to be something that's important. So they've added 3 pass catchers, and they've only truly added 1 new offensive lineman while they've lost 1 also. It's not a measuring stick of what's the most important, right? But it does give you an idea that when a team has a pocket full of cash and cap space, what they decide to do and who they decide to retain shows you where their mindset is. Now, the Jaguars, with this particular team, with Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson, last year was Trent Baalke and Doug Marrone. The year before, of course, it was Dave Caldwell and Doug Marrone. And all 3 have pretty much agreed with each other and maybe disagree with me a little bit and agreed with some fans. I'll give guys that I go back and forth with about this all the time a little bit of credit that they think they're okay on the offensive line. How do I come to that conclusion? It's because just like back when Doug Marrone and Dave Caldwell, they just decided when free agency hit that they were just going to add 1 guy. A guy who's a Pro Bowler, a former All-Pro, Brandon Scherf. And I keep getting people to tell me his name is Shreve, but Brandon Scherf is what I've called him ever since he was at Iowa, and that's what I'm probably keep calling him now. But when you think about Brandon Scherf, and then you think about everything else they did, they retained Tyler Shatley. They retained Will Richardson. They big up and talked big about Juwan Taylor, saying that he's a good football player. And even laughed, Trent Baalke even chuckled and laughed when people were talking about or asking him questions as if Juwan Taylor was just this replaceable football player. Cam Robinson, a second straight year on the franchise tag. So this tells me that they believe, just like their predecessors, that their offensive line is better than you think. Now, some folks will go, no, it just means that they think that the price or the value in replacing those guys isn't going to be worth giving up on the guys that you already have. And I say that's hogwash. Because why? Because they got the big time guard in free agency. There's a couple of big time talents at tackle in free agency, albeit injured, but that didn't stop them from getting Brandon Scherf. He's injured too. So what's the difference between him and Teron Armstead? There are three legitimate studs at tackle in the draft. Young guys that you compare with your quarterback. And I don't think I'm guessing that they've probably taken themselves out of that market because of the guys that they've made these commitments to, and the fact that they didn't address the edge position, which, along with offensive tackle, those are the guys that are sitting at the top of the draft. So it appears that everything is leaning towards them addressing the edge positions and not the offensive line. You franchise one guy, you have two other young guys fighting at the other spot. You signed a big time guard. You're not going to draft a dude that high and take him and put him at guard. So it looks like all things point to them going in another direction. It also looks and appears that at the top of the second round, they're going to be going in another direction, because when you look at the boards and the way the draft is set up, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a top flight guard that's going to fall to you at 33. And they'll probably look to add another player at another position at that spot. So what it tells me is that while they figured and felt that the offensive line needed help, I don't think they thought it was more of a personnel issue as much as it was a coaching issue. I think they looked at those big, young 25, 26-year-old guys and said, these are the type of guys that when you let them go, they go somewhere else and then they play well. I'll give you a perfect example. You remember Roger Saffold and you remember Austin Corbett, guys like that? Well, their initial team, they had them let them go. And then they went somewhere else and they played well because they started to develop, and they just took a little bit longer. Not saying that they were great players, but they were very, very serviceable football players. And I think the Jaguars have some guys that are like Cam Robinson, that if you let him go to another team, he'll be a very, very valuable asset. The Cowboys did it with Lyle Collins. They let Lyle Collins go because they're pretty much set on the offensive line, and Collins had a nice, solid market in free agency. So the Jaguars just aren't a playoff team. They're not even a middle of the road team. You can't let 25 and 26-year-old 320-pound guys go. Look, I get it. And it might be a situation where I'm thinking scared money don't make no money too, because sometimes when you want to get better, you just have to shoot for the moon. And even if you miss, you reach the stars. You know what I'm saying? So the thing is what they've done that's going to be watched like a hawk, because Trevor Lawrence is the key asset on this football team that you absolutely have to protect. The fans are going to take inventory in this. And this is why it's so important. And this is what I want to discuss today. If that line is a problem at any point in this year, in fact, not even a problem, if the line isn't superlative and one of the 8 or 9 best lines in the NFL this season, the fans are going to come for this organization because they had a chance to fix it in both free agency and the draft this year. Evan Neal and Eddie Iguanu Kid up at NC State and Charles Cross, I think, are guys that have Pro Bowl written all over them and potentially all pro written all over them for the long haul. If they don't get the production where you can at some point look at this line and go, that's a strength of this football team. And I'm not talking about being the best part of a bad football team. I mean being the absolute strength of the football team, and showing off and showing up and showing out and blowing people off the ball and protecting Trevor and keeping him upright and being a problem for all of these teams that are getting these mega pass rushers. Fans are going to take inventory, and I will too here on Locked On Jaguars, and I'm going to point it out that they had a chance to make that area a superlative area on the team, but they decided to just be solid. What other position are we going to be saying those things about? Wide receiver. Even though they've made some additions, some folks think they believe the Jaguars kind of reached and or as my grandmother or grandfather used to say, they retched around and didn't get everything that they were supposed to be getting, and screwed around with mediocrity and trying to prove that they're super scouts. We're going to talk about the wide receiver position in just a second here on a Monday edition of Locked On Jaguars. Built Bar, man. Let me tell you about Built Bar. Built Bar's off the chain, man. If you haven't, I'm hooked. Y'all heard me talk about salted caramel Built Bars forever, right? Well, I'm still in love with salt and caramel. That is salted caramel. That's salted caramel is my baby. And it's covered with 100% chocolate, and it is absolutely delicious. But what happened? Just like I hate when I go on vacation because my clients at the barbershop go somewhere else and maybe they'll like that haircut a little too much and won't come back. I ran out of salted caramel and had me some banana cream puffs made by Built Bar, which is it's a marshmallow infused snack. That's right. I had the marshmallow, I had the puffs, I had the churros, and let me tell you something, man. I didn't even miss salted caramel, even though I love it to death, because it is absolutely good. It's not even like a candy bar. It's like a treat. And you guys are going to enjoy it because I know you're going to go to Built Bar and use the promo code LOCK15. You're going to go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15. And you're going to go taste them. And you're going to see that I am not lying to you. Exactly what I'm telling you is true. That the macros are off the chain. The calorie level, the sugars and the carbs are very, very low. And the protein, shoot you a bang of about 17 or 18 grams of protein. So it helps you doing your workout. And also it helps you not load up on things that are bad for you, like calories. You just don't need them right now. So go to built.com, enter the promo code LOCK15. You're going to get 15% off your next order. Order the ones I told you to and come back on here and try to lie to me and tell me I'm not telling you the truth, because Built Bar is the truth. That's right. Built Bar, built.com, promo code LOCKed15. Thank you for being here and making us your first listener today here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL on YouTube. The Locked On NFL site is different from Locked On Jaguars. It's actually called Locked On NFL. Yours truly does a show on there on Wednesday with James Rapine, where we go around the league and talk about every single thing. But it's not just on Wednesdays. It's Monday through Friday, where they have these great hosts from around the Locked On Podcast Network, and they break it down to you every day. Each day is a little bit different and a little bit unique with what we all bring, but we all kind of put it together with the same consistency and format, and you'll get the 5 different perspectives on the way the NFL goes. So make sure you go to the Locked On NFL YouTube page, like and subscribe that page as well. We're talking about things that the Jaguars did that I know folks are going to watch and they're going to look with bated breath. Now, it's not going to be hopefully a gotcha moment. Okay, like, that's not why I'm doing this. I don't want to hit me up a T-Wig, gotcha, the offensive line was fine. Or, hey, gotcha, they should have fixed wide receivers. But historically, what has happened with this franchise is they've had a chance to do things and they didn't do it, and they chose to go in another direction. And when you choose to go in another direction, it is catastrophic, and it has been catastrophic. And I think those decisions, when you add them together as a collective, have really been what has caused the Jaguars fan base to feel like they should feel, as if they're in purgatory and they have a hangover and a headache that they just can't get rid of, like this wet blanket wrapped around your head in the middle of the summertime, right? So what we have is a situation where, and I'm going to give you some examples, right? The Jaguars wanted a big back. Preferably Tom Coughlin wanted a big back in 2016. So he chose Leonard Fournette, which I love me some Lenny, but by wanting a big back, that means you eliminated all the small backs like McCaffrey, like Dalvin, like Alvin Kamara. So you miss an opportunity to get a small back because you specifically wanted a big back. Not retaining Allen Robinson or not extending him early. Not extending Yannick Ngakoue early when it only cost you another $4 million in guaranteed money, not even cash up front. All of these things, not keeping Calais Campbell around as a grown man in the room when this is where he wanted to be. Not drafting Lamar Jackson because you committed to Blake Bortles. Actually committing to Blake Bortles. Dave Caldwell's first year here, they had to keep Gene Smith, Mike Mularkey. Well, they didn't keep Gene Smith, but they kept Mike Mularkey and they kept Blaine Gabbert to see, like, what can we see? Well, what you're going to see is you wasted a year drafting Luke Jokel instead of drafting Lane Johnson. Not trading back up into the 27th pick, only 6 or 7 picks in front of you in the first round to take DeAndre Hopkins because it wasn't time for the team to draft a wide receiver. Drafting Juwan Taylor 1 pick ahead of Deebo Samuel. You see, I'm not even cherry picking. There's not one thing. These are multiple things over the years. And these multiple things, these are little things that you can overcome, start to add up and become big things. So now, when you make big decisions and you're aggressive in free agency the way the Jaguars did this year, folks are still going to give you that scrutiny because they want to look and see what you did, and they also want to look and see what you didn't do. Somebody told me a long time ago, you can commit a crime, but you can also omit something. And what that means is committing a crime is going out and doing something wrong. Omitting something is doing something you should do and not doing anything because you want to be safe. So the Jaguars are in that situation that people don't trust them. The fans don't trust them. And right now, the fans are on a little bit of it's like bated breath. It's like every single day. It's like, okay, you did something. All right, it's good that you did something, but I still don't believe in you. And part of that is because the retaining of Trent Baalke. People just wanted a clean sweep. But Trent had a good week. He had a good week because he sort of broke the mold a little bit. Now, there are some around the league that believe that Trent actually reset the wide receiver market when he signed Christian Kirk to a 4-year deal that could be worth up to $84 million. We know it's a 2-year, $37 million deal that's very cap-friendly. By the way, those cap-friendly deals, Dave Caldwell invented that stuff here in Jacksonville, so we're going to give him a little bit of credit for doing things that doesn't hurt the team long term. And the reason why he did things that didn't hurt the team long term is because a lot of times, and Dave's my friend, he did things that weren't right, so it couldn't hurt the team along. He didn't want to hurt the team. You could almost say these guys are hedging their bets a little bit, which I ain't got no problem with. But if you're going to hedge your bets, you're going to give a guy a whole bunch of money up front, too. If you can release me in 2 years, I'm going to make sure you pay me for 2 years I'm here. So Christian Kirk got that deal. What do they see in a young Christian Kirk? Do you believe a guy who was a number 2/number 3 can be a good enough football player to have the impact on your team that makes other teammates better? Here's what I think is going to happen, or the thinking behind it. He's not a number 1. But in our offense, he could be a 1A. He could be a 1A or a B. We still have to find another guy. We have to find another guy. We think at 33, we're going to get a guy. We think that guy might not be ready to be Jamar Chase, but we think the guy might be ready to be T. Higgins in year 2. And if he turns out to be T. Higgins in year 2, that means he's probably on a track to be what Allen Robinson was in year 3. That means he's on a track to be what Devontae Adams was in his year 3. That means he's on track to be what Cooper Kupp developed into in year 3. Guys that were sort of taken in that same spot and that were developed, but we don't expect them to have to do everything early, but just grow every week. So if you look up and halfway through Christian Kirk's second year, he's still a reliable number 2 because George Pickens or Christian Watson have actually developed into that long-term number 1. There you go. I got news for you. Outside of a trade and outside of some of the weird things we've seen this year, every single team that has ever had a great receiver who was in their organization for 10 years, who was a guy that should have been a lifetime player in that organization, a guy who's like the best player in that organization, that position, very rarely do they come the way Jimmy Smith came. Very rarely do they come the way Keenan McCardell came anymore. The way you get them, teams don't just let guys like that hit free agency. You know how you get them? You draft them. The Chargers have paid both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. They picked them. That's why they paid them. Those were their own guys. Now, you might see something like what happened with Hopkins. You might see something happen like with D-Hop where he got traded, where a team was boneheaded and stupid, shout out to Locked On Texans, and traded a guy to Arizona. But for the most part, A.J. Brown was drafted by Tennessee. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were drafted by Seattle. Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Donald Driver. Those guys were drafted in Green Bay. And I mentioned Devontae Adams. So if you look at history, Deebo Samuel was drafted by San Francisco. If you look at history, right in that second round, at the very top of that second round, those ex-receivers and those great receivers that were picked by those teams were chosen and developed right there in that spot. That might be what they're trying to do. And you're about to hear me say something I normally don't say. But listen, I think it's a very, very good idea that they did it that way. You got me. I said it. And what they have, if a guy isn't ready, they have another guy in Zay Jones that, although he has the worst haircut I've ever seen, he is a cat, and people keep trying to refer him to me. Oh, no. You leave that brother alone and let him stay right where he is, and I'll enjoy it from a distance. But Zay Jones is a guy who's caught 70 balls, a guy who is a professional NFL pass catcher. He's not a Philip Dorsett and no disrespect, but a guy who's always been banged up and hasn't really lived up to anything. He's a guy who's run some routes. He's a guy who's done a lot of things. And yeah, he was a first round pick, but guess what? We're not asking him to be all that. We're sort of asking him here to be what he was in LA. He made the room better. You don't have to experiment now with guys. You have guys who are really, really pros at what they do. And he does run. He can separate. So he's shown to be a fast but functional football player. They weren't going to fix that wide receiver. But I probably now, to be honest, I'm going to be honest what I would have done. I would have signed Kirk, but I would have also traded for Amari Cooper. And people are going, well, Coop wouldn't have wanted to come here. Coop wouldn't have had a choice. Coop didn't have a no-trade clause. You bring Coop in here and you throw some cash at him the way that Cleveland has done, where they extend him out. They extend him out, give him some upfront money to create cap space. I would have much rather had Amari Cooper and Christian Kirk, and I think people would have been happy. That's just me. And I'm not saying that the Jaguars didn't inquire and his agent told him, or, they were like, look, he's not going to sign there long term, so you're just going to play him or whatever. I don't know. But if it were me, I would have done that, and I would have been a little more happy with that. I probably would have gone after Cedric Wilson. I ain't no problem. I would have gotten Cedric Wilson too. But because they didn't do exactly what I wanted them to do, doesn't mean that I don't think they did something really, really good here for their football team. Let's tie all of this stuff up. And I'm going to tell you, so I talked about what they did versus what they didn't do. I talked on the offensive line about what they did versus what they didn't do. Now I'm going to go to the draft, and I'm going to show you how, hopefully, what they'll do in the draft will make all of it make sense, and nobody will be upset when it comes to getting back, trying to get back to winning ways here in Jacksonville. And how does it all make sense from a long-term perspective? I've kind of given you a few hints, but I'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars after I remind you of the games that went on the last 2 days in college basketball's tournament. Man, if you weren't on the edge of your seat in a lot of these games and saw how these kids were fighting every single possession, it had to make you feel good, right? It really made you feel good if you were on the winning side because you saw guys battling to help your ticket that you had in your pocket with that 3-team parlay. And BetOnline is where you should have got that because it remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It ain't just basketball. There's some fights this weekend. There's some UFC, some boxing, all of that stuff. And of course, your favorite Vegas casino games, including live betting. All of these things are at betonline.net. So you need to head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. And the reason why you want to do that is because BetOnline is where the game starts. And where you start every day is here on Locked On Jaguars with me, Tony Wiggins. You can find me on Twitter at ShopTalkingWig, also on YouTube, on the Locked On Jaguars YouTube page and the Locked On NFL YouTube page. You know where else you can find? We're about to talk some draft, and there's nobody that does it better than former NFL player Eric Crocker and my analytics expert Ryan Tracy. Man, Locked On NFL Draft is a daily show, daily. and had yours truly on there last week, and we were talking about rebuilding the Jags. Go on there, listen to those guys, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, because what they'll do to you is tell you every single thing that you need to know about prospects, and they'll go very, very much in depth with you. And that's exactly what you want. And I know I got some hockey fans out there, right? I know my man Rick Ballou is out there somewhere. The NFL trade deadline is here, right? All of the Locked On NHL shows will be going live at 3 p.m. for about 30 minutes. So NFL, the NHL shows, they're a priority. They're outstanding. You need to take a look at them. We have great hosts all around the Locked On NHL. So make sure you tune in, because the trade deadline is at 3 p.m. for about 30 minutes. All right, so the draft is coming up, and we mentioned the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. We know that it looks like it's Aiden Hutchinson with a bullet, unless they fall in love with somebody else. Who could they possibly fall in love with, based on what they've done in free agency and what those commitments have sort of shown you what they're thinking? Who could they fall in love with? They could fall in love with Travon Walker, but when you really look at it, his production doesn't really match Aiden Hutchinson. Now, I say that with this caveat. There were other players on Georgia's team, too. Aiden Hutchinson had David Ojabo and, of course, Daxton Hill. But there were other players on Georgia that are sitting here in the draft that made a ton of plays. So sometimes when you go numbers to numbers and you sit them beside each other, that doesn't tell the whole story. Because Georgia had, I can't tell you, I think Georgia has 31 guys that's going to get drafted. It feels like that. They have so many guys that were making plays. And many times when you play Georgia, the thing was to either try to run the football to shorten the game, or to get the ball out of your hand very quickly so the pass rush couldn't bother with you. So a lot of that goes into why guys didn't put up certain numbers too. I think this is where it's important that you really, really have to go watch tape. But he's certainly one of those guys, and Walker is Travon Walker is the real deal. Kyle Allen, Kyle Hamilton, not Kyle Allen, Kyle Hamilton, the safety. He's an eye popper. He's another guy that, although you're expecting a 4.39 or a 4.4 at the combine, you didn't get that. You got like a 4.56. I've seen him on tape. The dude runs like a gazelle, and he closes up space. So that's another situation that you have to really pay attention to, that if they get sort of a trade, who they could move down and get. I'm still not going to rule out one of the offensive linemen that they could move down and potentially tap into. A lot of people thought for a while Treylon Burks was going to be that guy that would blow up the combine and make the Jaguars scratch their head and go, should we do it? But that didn't work out, his measurables. And there were already people that were confused by his tape about what they saw. They just looked like they saw a big guy there running around, but he wasn't really polished. And then he wasn't super off the charts athletically at the combine either with his numbers. So I think one of those linemen, Thibodeau, is still obviously in play, who I've been on record saying that I think he's going to have one of those Micah Parsons type seasons that makes everybody go, damn, he really was that good. There's just something about him. I do think he's sad for David Ojabo, though. I heard his draft stock isn't really going to fall that much because people thought he was going to be a prospect, but that he could be someone that one of these teams, one of these playoff teams, take late in the first round and bring him along slowly. By the end of the year, he'll be playing, and then he'll be ready to go in year two. You just never want to see that. A guy who's been waiting his entire life to make this money, being in a position on draft night to get paid, and then you have an injury at your workout. That's the Michigan edge rusher, by the way. But second round guys, now with them signing Fadusaki, I always thought the Jags had a chance at the top of the second round to go interior lineman or big defensive tackle too, because you never get enough of those guys. And if somebody you was sitting there and they could play, whether it was Devontae Wyatt or Jordan Davis, Perrion Winfrey, those guys have sort of taken over that interior part, whereas Fedarian Mathis coming in, when I was at the Senior Bowl, he was a guy that they sort of propped up a little bit, but it just, all of that didn't match up to what you saw on tape. So I don't think his stock is as high as it was, but those three interior guys I just mentioned were guys that I thought the Jags would consider. But with them signing Saki, man, I don't anticipate that they're going to do that. I think in the second round, you're still looking at linebacker. You're still looking at Nakobe Dean, even though he measured at 5'11 and a half, 226. I still say this, man. If he was 6'1.5", 226, would that matter? If that would change your mind, then that's this much. You stand a guy that's 5'11.5" next to a guy that's 6'1", you really don't see that much of a difference. So you're sitting there wondering, what's the big deal? You know what I'm saying? So I think guys like that, I think Daxton Hill. By the way, something the Jaguars did when they tendered Dewey Wingard, that's another player that is better in their eyes. This is the second or third straight administration that thinks that fans or media. So sometimes they just see and view things a little bit different. And we don't know how guys respond and act inside of the building. So that's a whole nother thing. But wide receiver, whether it's George Pickens, whether it's Christian Watson, guys that can be a true X receiver at the top of the second round. If they take an edge rusher, I feel like they'll go in another direction. If Daxton Hill's sitting there looking at you, they've locked up 4 corners on the contract. So if Kyer Elam or someone is there, I don't think they're going to make that move. Safety, linebacker, edge, if they don't go edge. I don't think that there may be a guard, but they're loaded at guard. They may go left guard at the top of the second round. I do believe, though, we're looking at wide receiver, edge, if they don't go edge. But if they do go edge, I think we're looking at wide receiver, linebacker, and safety at the top of the second round. Best player available, top of the third round, regardless of position except quarterback. I think you'll probably see the Jags go in that direction. Make sure you tune in to Locked On Jaguars every single day. We love the fact that you join us and make us your first listen. And please, please, please take care of each other. We'll see you tomorrow. And what we're going to talk about tomorrow, unless something happens, we're going to really, really talk about the running back position and the importance that it might be for the Jaguars to grab someone, because the 2 guys that they have are coming off of injury. And even if they weren't, you saw what happened last year when they both got hurt. And I think you need to have running backs that are dynamic. And there's a team that I think they can learn from, and the team is the San Francisco 49ers. It seems like no matter who they plug in, they can play. I think if we're sort of running that kind of system, and I think Doug Peterson does that, then they're going to look at these guys now that are backups as guys that can be true playmakers. So who can do that in the draft? And we're going to go through that. And why I think it's important that even if both guys are healthy, you need to address the running back position with a third spot. All right, we're going to do that tomorrow. But until then, I'm Tony Wiggins here with Locked On Jaguars. You guys continue to take care of each other